of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 2. Noreneco Cafe. A week later saw him keeping to his tight and efficient. Crazy, one of his former colleagues had laughed as they worked a graveyard shift at a Tokyo Starbucks together. Schedule. The bulk of the renovations were complete. He'd set up a wireless security system and set up his smart till as well. If the patrons who came by saw that there was no actual money being kept on the premises, because even kids these days had debit cards, that was one less reason to target him. He'd still accept yen, of course, but he wouldn't be obvious about it. He wouldn't have an ATM machine in the cafe either. That would just be asking for trouble. And now, the weather's still glorious. He'd opened up the door. The tops of the 3 large bay windows, the wooden frames, looked better than he'd hoped, considering he'd purchased them during a sale. Who wouldn't want to buy cherry red fittings artfully scattered with white and yellow paw prints? Which bracketed the cafe and started painting. He'd taken the color scheme from the windows, because his studies of successful cafe chains often highlighted the need to pick a theme and stick with it. Most people liked uniformity, and it looked more professional. Apparently, his inner minimalist had wanted to paint everything magnolia and be done with it, though. 2. The back wall, which concealed the kitchen of the most part, he left the service opening and decided he'd put some potted herbs there, both practical, useful, and stylish, was similarly cherry red. He'd broken it up with cheap but nice framed pictures of cats, because, yes, it was illogical, but he loved them. The frames, of course, were either white or yellow. Then the small pillar walls between the booths and windows were white with one large matching yellow-framed cat image hung at the same height running along. However, at the end of the service bar, that he'd be spending most of his time behind, the display case now gleaming and humming as it worked, was a relatively large squared space. Here he'd sectioned it into 2 areas. One housed a relatively long former dining table, which he'd set up as a study space, the walls lined with bookshelves he intended to stock with educational texts and supplies. The other was going to be a video game hub, because kids like that kind of thing, with a relatively large TV, bought secondhand, and a gaming console, similarly upcycled, but it worked. It came with 2 controllers and a bundle of RPGs, educational and non-violent problem-solving games. He'd be keeping the tech locked up until it was asked for, and would stress to any children who came to his cafe that once it was stolen, and that would be that. No, excuse me, Aizawa-san? Blinking out of his thoughts, his head turning back to the open cafe door. There was nothing worth stealing in his place yet, so he'd left it that way for ventilation. It was all ordered and ready to be delivered, though. Shouta offered a nod at one of the more curious residents of the era.
Midoriya-san,
he greeted with a nod and a small smile.
Good morning.
Good morning to you as well, she returned with a little bow of her head, her hand gently gesturing her shy, freckled son forward. My, isn't this lovely, Izucha? She asked, her eyes widening. My goodness, do you ever sleep, Aizawa-san? She gasped whilst looking around at the progress he'd made. Oh, this whole place is hardly recognizable, she praised. We really like all of the cat pictures too, don't we, son? Yes, the boy answered cutely, his all-might figurine pressed to his chest as he peered inside.
Yeah, I'm glad you approve,
he replied good-naturedly, whilst putting his paintbrush down on the dust-covered sheet floor. That new linoleum, a gritty red, had been pricey, and stood with a stretch. He'd have to do some kata and stretches later, but first, duty called.
I have your bento ready to go,
he said, whilst rubbing some of the paint that had smeared across his hands onto his love-worn, formerly white boiler suit, and walking away from the game hub he was painting yellow paw prints around. He seemed to be doing anything to get out of cleaning, retiling, and grouting the 2 small yet serviceable toilets, didn't he? Which was irrational, he knew. He couldn't officially open without them being up to code, could he? No, you're a godsend! The usually tired, he noticed how late she normally came home from his windows. Her little boy walked towards their apartment block, half an hour later by a blonde woman and a sulky, similarly blonde-haired child. Woman breathed, her head bowing once more. The poor thing. He'd not meant to talk to her or drum up business before his cafe was up and running. However, one evening, he'd been fixing the candy-striped awning to the support beam above his newly fitted and still not broken. He'd seen a few teenagers eyeing them through his CCTV and scared them shitless by speaking to them through the outdoor speakers. Windowson saw her. She was fighting back tears, her grocery bags too heavy for her arms, and he couldn't see the purse she usually carried. He'd carefully approached and offered her to come inside for a cup of coffee. And such a small kindness, her dam had finally broken. Her ex-husband was abroad and didn't pay child support, the prick. Her son had been informed he was quirkless a few months prior. He was heartbroken, his former confidence and energy replaced by shyness, tears, and remorse. And even though she was flogging herself to death at work, making ends meet was becoming difficult. Then her perch was snatched by a man who'd threatened her with a knife quirk that evening. She genuinely wondered how she was going to keep everything together for her son. She even apologized for bothering him. God! And so he closed up the cafe, walked her home with the groceries, given her some of his pre-made dinners, free of charge, they were neighbors after all, called the police, and helped her to find a few support agencies she could contact. She wasn't the first parent to be left high and dry by a partner, after all. He'd then insisted that she and her son come by for their lunches until her new credit and debit cards arrived, and just like that, he was already making the kind of difference he'd been hoping for.
Okay, here's one for you.
He smiled, the plain lunchbox all the better thanks to the little black paw print stamper he'd made. Customers liked a more personal touch, and this also kept his costs down. Black bento boxes were 40% cheaper than decorated ones. Now passed over to a very gracious Inco. Then crouching down to meet the 6-year-old's eye level, he held out the second box to the boy. He was a frightened, skittish little thing, and all the more reserved because of his recent devastating diagnosis. He reminded him so much of the boys he'd used to look after. They were all teenagers now, and all thriving, too. He could hardly wait for the next school holiday to roll around so they could visit.
This one is for you.
He grinned.
Would you do me a favor and open it?
Blinking and nodding, the forest-haired child gently took the meal with a wobbly, "Thank you, Aizawa-san." His all-might figure tucked under his arm as he pulled the lid open. Oh, wow! He gasped, his anxiety chased away by delight as he held the box out for his mother to see. "It's All Might!" he veritably chirped. "Aizawa-san, you're so clever!" He praised, his eyes tearing. "Mama, I don't know if I can eat it!" he close to cried. "It's too good! You've got his hair right and everything!" Chuckling as he stood, his head inclining at the grateful look that Inko sent his way, Shouta huffed while folding his arms.
"Not eating it would be irrational,"
he stated.
"And besides, if you want to take some self-defense lessons with me, you need to make sure you eat properly, all right?"
Yes, of course, Aizawa-san! Thank you!" the tot stated excitedly before carefully replacing the lid and bowing. I won't let you down!"
"Yeah, I know you won't,"
he assured.
"Now have a good day at school, all right?"
Nodding adamantly, Izuku reverently placed his lunch into his school satchel and kept that magnificent smile upon his face. Then, as he watched the parent and child go, the cafe owner couldn't help but wonder what kind of heartless dickhead would abandon such wonderful people. Not every villain, he reminded himself, ran around taunting the cops and heroes in stupid outfits, did they? As the day rolled on, the toilets were finally deep cleaned and updated with easy-to-wash-down materials. He was not looking forward to cleaning them. However, he'd helped to potty train a few kids in his day, so it wasn't as though he couldn't handle mess. Shouta looked around at the spoils of his labor. Not too shabby at all. Then, deciding to take a late lunch, he let his hair down, having it tied up all the time gave him a headache, and started towards the service bar's privacy gate, his hand going to open it when the security system pinged his smartphone. Blinking, he slipped the device out of the boiler suit's front pouch and checked the CCTV cameras. There was a kid, 14 or so, messing with a dumpster behind his property. Yoshida-san had warned him about arsonists. Apparently kids got some kind of thrill out of setting bins on fire. It was a good job he'd purchased that extendable fire hose, wasn't it?
"Oi,"
he said through the camera speaker set he'd installed, his eyes narrowing when the kid, baggy t-shirt, jeans, old sneakers. Shit, why wasn't he in school? Where were his parents? Froze, his hands on the dumpster.
"You okay there?"
Blinking, his brows lifting when the boy looked up at the device. He frowned when he saw the art markings on the teen's face. What he'd mistaken for sleeves actually looked like burned skin, too. Huh. Sneering at the camera, a plume of blue flames manifesting from his hair, the kid looked as though he was going to blast his equipment. Shit, it was heat and fire resistant to a degree, and sure, he was insured, but...
Can you not?
He heard himself say. The kid replied, his head cocking before a cruel smirk tugged his lips.
What you gonna do, huh? Call the cops? Do you think they'll come here to help you, old man?
Oh, man! Chuckling, the sound causing the boy to blink, he said,
No, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't.
Then with a sigh,
What are you doing back there anyway? Surely you've got better things to do. Does it look like I do?
The boy snapped.
Oh, I guess not.
He reasoned.
You hungry? I'm about to have lunch.
As if I'd eat with some creepy fuck who probes on people through a camera. The other veritably hissed, the tone of his words cutting, the venom suggesting that he'd meant such probes. Shouta frowned.
You don't have to eat with me,
he said calmly.
And I get it. You should always be careful when strangers speak to you,
he added.
But I have no interest in children other than helping them. I'm a level 7 listed childminder, and the cafe I'm opening is going to be a registered study space.
He furthered, his shoulders shrugging lightly, even though the other couldn't see them.
I'll leave a bento box on a chair by the front door,
he continued.
Take it. Don't take it. It's your choice, and sure, I'd prefer if you didn't mount my security cameras, but that's what insurance is for, right?
Then, cutting off the speaker, but keeping an eye on the kid as he swiftly moved into the service bar area and through the fire door, which led to his not fully functional but clean, the new refrigerators, merrily humming in the background, kitchen. Shouta grabbed 2 of his pre-made bento, which he made every morning like a ritual. They were a hobby, really. And walked back out. The kid, surprisingly, was waiting for him, his relatively tall, lanky form propped by the door jamb and looking in. His left hand was on fire. He'd not wanted to use his quirk in public. He didn't need or want anyone's attention, thank you, and being underestimated in an area like this was always going to be a bonus. But he could have been needed to.
You got any money? Not so, old man?
Blinking, a smile quivering his lips despite himself, the older of the two shook his head.
Sorry,
he replied as he approached, the boy's eyes widening. He was probably wondering why he wasn't running away screaming.
I'm not open yet, and like you said, the cops wouldn't be rushing over here to investigate a robbery. He admitted that smart till is useless when it's unplugged, and all transactions go through the wireless network in an instant.
He shrugged.
I've got food, though, and a soda, if you promise not to torch the place.
Isn't that what insurance is for? The other countered sarcastically, his flameless hands snatching the box dispassionately. Shit. This kid looked like he'd been through hell and back. Not that he'd say so aloud. He was probably touchy about his scarring. Not that he could blame him.
Holy shit!
Cocking his head to the side, his eyes carefully tracking, as the kid went from shoving a tentative chopstick load of seasoned rice into his mouth to shoveling it in, Shouta allowed himself to grin a little as the teen sat on the chair by the door and demolished the box.
I'll get you that soda.
He offered, his own bento box snagged when he proffered it. Then, as he slowly walked to the empty display case, the cans of drink most young people drank these days sat there in an icebox, he watched the youth watching him.
You got a preference?
Whatever. He grunted through mouthfuls of tamagoyaki, his face incredulous.
This is fucking amazing!
He admitted hotly.
Thanks.
He replied whilst placing the can of Coke within the teen's reach before unscrewing and gulping down a jelly pouch. Damn, he'd probably live off of these things if they could. They were just so practical.
You want any more? I can't pay, you know. Did I ask you for any money?
He countered.
I don't want your charity. Well, I don't want to be hit with a penalty for serving food without being officially opened and inspected by the Health and Safety Food Commission,
he said, his arms folding.
Making bento is kind of a hobby of mine, that's all. It's relaxing to put the pieces together,
he added with a shrug. This, the other snorted as though he'd lost his mind, is a hobby?
As uncool as it sounds.
He grinned before leaning on the bar, his head tilting around his almost finished establishment.
Besides, it'd be kind of stupid to open a cafe and not serve food you can eat in it, right? Huffing and wiping at his mouth, the teen put the boxes on the table before grabbing his soda and chugging a gulp or two. "What other things do you make?"
Blinking, he was sure that the teen would have been up and moving by now. Shouta hummed.
"Various cakes. The European ones are relatively easy, but I guess I'll see what local tastes are like before I commit to that." He mused. "Bread, which I'll make into those American sandwiches everyone seems to rave about. Oh, and pies," he stated. "Pastry can be a pain in the ass if you are careful, though."
He sighed, his mind briefly going back to the arguments he'd had with the ovens back in high school. The sound of Fuji-sensei laughing and agreeing with him, a more pleasant memory from the past.
"Why the hell are you here?" Don't look at me like that. You've clearly got the skills to make it in Tokyo or Kyoto or something." The other grunted, his drink nearly gone. "You're not gonna get any snooty rich motherfuckers coming into this place," he argued. "Well, it's a good job that I'm not a fan of snooty rich motherfuckers then, isn't it?" he quipped. "Strange as this probably sounds, you wouldn't be the first to call me crazy. I wanted to set up here because I spent most of my life in a shady care center a few blocks down the way," he revealed. "I wanted to come back here and try to make it, well, not so shitty." He chuckled. "Districts like this deserve nice things, just like anywhere else." "You are crazy!" the blue-eyed youth grunted while standing, the empty can crushed in his hand. "See you around, not so old guy," he furthered before walking out of the door, his hands jammed dejectedly in his pockets as he stalked away with speed. It looked as though he'd found someone else in need of help. But only time would tell if he'd accept it or not.